They thought the galaxy was finally at peace, its vast empires thriving, its ancient rivalry buried in the annals of history. Humanity was but a distant memory, a long extinct race swallowed by time. But when the stars themselves seemed to whisper a warning, and an impossible shadow emerged from the void, the galaxy's fragile calm shattered. For in the endless darkness of space, something long forgotten had awakened, a force so primal, so relentless, it would make the universe tremble once more. The galaxy had moved on, as galaxies tend to do. Stars were born, burned brightly, and collapsed into the void. Planets thrived and withered under the watchful gaze of civilizations that considered themselves eternal. The threat from Earth was an ancient tale told more for amusement than as a cautionary reminder. Humanity had burned brightly once, like a comet streaking across the night sky, only to fizzle into obscurity. They were relics of a time when desperation fueled innovation, and survival demanded sacrifices that modern species could scarcely comprehend. Civilizations now spanned the stars in networks so vast that their edges blurred into mystery. Trade routes glimmered like veins of light across the galaxy's spiral arms, carrying goods, technology, and promises of prosperity. Peace, albeit fragile, had become the currency of interstellar relations. The galaxy wasn't perfect, far from it, but it had settled into something resembling stability. In this grand tapestry, Earth and its children were a footnote. History recorded the humans as a species that had climbed too high, too fast, only to fall with spectacular finality. Their war machines, once feared, were now museum pieces or used as amusing cautionary tales by alien tutors. Learn from humanity, they would say. They reached for the stars before mastering their own chaos. The lesson always ended with laughter and the occasional shrug. After all, the humans were gone, weren't they? On the fringes of this interstellar utopia lay remnants of human ambition, forgotten colonies, derelict ships drifting in silence, and planets stripped bare by resource-hungry explorers. One such planet sat quietly in the outer rim, its surface pockmarked by long-abandoned mining operations. Once a thriving hub of human ingenuity, it was now a ghost world. Its cities had crumbled into dust, its atmosphere choked with the echoes of machines that had fallen silent centuries ago. Occasionally, curious travelers would stumble upon these ruins, poking through the wreckage for trinkets of a bygone era. Human artifacts were considered quaint collectibles, their designs outdated yet oddly captivating. A few species even joked that humanity had been the galaxy's first attempt at intelligent life, a beta version that didn't quite work out. The punchline was always the same: they were good at blowing things up, but not much else. Yet for all their mockery, there was an unspoken truth lingering beneath the surface. Humanity's disappearance wasn't just an accident of history, it was a deliberate erasure. The wars they had fought, the enemies they had made, and the alliances they had broken were not easily forgotten. While most civilizations dismissed humans as a harmless relic, the oldest among them harbored a lingering unease. They remembered the ferocity with which humans fought, the unpredictability of their tactics, and the way they adapted with terrifying speed. It was said that no one could outlast a human in a fight, not because they were stronger or smarter, but because they refused to lose. And yet, those fears had faded with time. What threat could a species pose when it was scattered, broken, and forgotten? The galaxy had prospered in their absence after all. New powers had risen, empires with fleets so vast they could blot out the stars. The sentient beings of the cosmos believed they had nothing to fear. But the universe has a way of humbling those who grow too comfortable. Unbeknownst to the galaxy's great civilizations, there were whispers in the dark, faint ripples that disturbed the stillness of space. Untraceable signals flickered in the background of hyperspace channels, ignored by most as static or interference. Only the most paranoid of species paid them any mind, and even they dismissed the signals as remnants of defunct probes or forgotten technology. After all, who would be foolish enough to consider the alternative? In truth, the galaxy's calm was not the product of peace, but of collective ignorance. They had turned their gaze inward, focused on growth and stability, and forgotten the dangers lurking in the void. Humanity had become a ghost story told to frighten the young little more than an echo of the past. But echoes have a way of growing louder, especially when ignored. The galaxy's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating humanity. It was assuming that the story had ended. They had forgotten the one lesson that every species, at some point, learns: when something vanishes without a trace, it's never truly gone. It's waiting, watching, planning. And so, the great civilizations of the galaxy carried on, blissfully unaware of the shadow looming on the horizon. They congratulated themselves on their progress, celebrated their prosperity, and laughed at the thought of a long-dead species returning to threaten their dominance. In their hubris, they failed to notice the faint tremors in the fabric of space. They dismissed the warnings hidden in ancient texts and the gut-wrenching unease of those who remembered humanity's true nature. They thought themselves safe, secure in their power and wisdom. They were wrong. Beneath the surface of the galaxy's complacent tranquility, something began to shift. It was subtle at first, a faint whisper in the great silence of the void. The signals came sporadically, flickering across hyperspace like phantom ripples in a calm pond. No discernible pattern, no clear source, just fragmented bursts of energy that danced on the edges of comprehension. Most civilizations brushed these off as cosmic background noise. After all, the universe was vast and full of strange echoes. Stars burped radiation, black holes sang in frequencies no one wanted to hear, and ancient, defunct probes from forgotten eras occasionally coughed up weak transmissions as they drifted aimlessly. This was no different, or so they thought. For the galaxy's most advanced observers, however, the signals were like an itch that couldn't be ignored. The pulses were too irregular, too precise to be natural. The patterns didn't align with the chaotic emissions of dying stars or rogue phenomena. Something about them felt deliberate, as though someone or something was tapping out a message on the fabric of hyperspace itself. The first species to notice was the Vorathin, an enigmatic race that prided themselves on cataloging the galaxy's mysteries. Known for their obsession with knowledge, they had a reputation for uncovering secrets no one else cared to find. Their hyperspace observatories stretched across light years, each one tuned to the faintest murmurs of the cosmos. When the fragmented transmissions began, the Vorathin were the first to raise an eyebrow or whatever equivalent facial expression their gelatinous forms could muster. The Vorathin quickly realized these weren't random bursts of noise. The energy signatures were faint but impossibly complex, like an ancient code hidden within layers of static. They dubbed it the fragmented transmission and set about deciphering its meaning. As days turned to months, their most sophisticated decryption algorithms failed to make sense of it. The message defied all known logic, slipping through the cracks of even their most advanced systems. It was as if the signal was taunting them, daring them to understand. Other civilizations caught wind of the Vorathin's discovery and promptly dismissed it. Static, declared the Kelran Union, a race of cybernetic perfectionists who considered themselves the galaxy's technological elite. An artifact of decaying relics, scoffed the Othariae, whose arrogance was matched only by their love of decorative headgear. The general consensus was clear: the fragmented transmission was a curiosity at best, not worth losing sleep or bandwidth over. The Vorathin disagreed. For them, the signal wasn't just a puzzle, it was a challenge. They scoured their archives, delving into records older than some stars, hoping to find a clue. But the deeper they dug, the more unsettling the silence became. There was no trace of anything like it in the galaxy's collective history. It was as if the signal had materialized from nowhere, unlinked to any known source or event. Then, as abruptly as it had started, the signal stopped. The transmission ceased, leaving nothing but an eerie void in their place. The Vorathin, frustrated and intrigued, doubled their efforts, but the silence mocked them. Without the fragmented bursts to study, their search hit a dead end. For most, this would have been the end of the story, a blip in the grand expanse of time, forgotten as quickly as it was noticed. But for the Vorathin, the silence was louder than the signal itself. They couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting, biding its time. The fragmented transmission had felt alive, almost predatory in its nature. It wasn't a cry for help or a distress signal as something else entirely, something that didn't fit into the neat categories of galactic understanding. The other races, of course, mocked their paranoia. The Kelran Union joked that the Vorathin had finally cataloged madness and offered to send therapists equipped with anti-anxiety lasers. The Othari suggested that the Vorathin might benefit from taking up pottery, as it was known to calm frazzled neural pathways. Even the normally somber Cytheran ascendancy chimed in with their version of humor, suggesting that the signal was probably just a dying toaster from the ancient human era. Yet, despite the ridicule, the Vorthin remained uneasy. They knew enough about the universe to recognize the gaps in their knowledge. And this was a chasm. The transmission had felt primal, carrying an undercurrent of something old and forgotten, something the galaxy had long since erased from its collective memory. Time passed, and with it, the galaxy's attention drifted. The fragmented transmission became a footnote, a curiosity consigned to the back pages of hyperspace bulletins. The Vorthin continued their quiet investigations, but even they began to question their obsession. Then, just as the galaxy had almost forgotten, the signal returned. This time it wasn't faint. It wasn't fragmented. It was a roaring pulse that shook the hyperspace network to its core, leaving no room for doubt. The message was no longer a mystery, it was a declaration. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy felt something it had almost forgotten: fear. The galaxy's rhythm had returned to normal, or so it seemed. The fragmented transmissions became another unsolved mystery to file away, a curiosity that faded with time. Civilizations continued their endless pursuits: expansion, trade, diplomacy, and the occasional interstellar bickering over whose nebula-shaped dessert was superior. Peace reigned, or at least its fragile illusion held. Then it happened. The transmission came without warning, ripping through hyperspace like a thunderclap in a silent cathedral. It didn't whisper, it roared. This was no ghostly fragment, no elusive puzzle for curious archivists. It was deliberate, sharp, and undeniable. The signal wasn't just received, it was felt, resonating through the very fabric of reality. Every sensor, every comms array, every scrap of hyperspace-linked technology across the galaxy lit up simultaneously. The signal bypassed encryption protocols and ignored firewalls as though they were nothing more than spiderwebs in its path. The message embedded itself into every network, scrawled in blazing light across the void for all to see. It read, "We are here." 3 simple words. 3 words that sent shockwaves through the galaxy's collective consciousness. There were no coordinates, no origin point, no indication of where or how it had been broadcast. It seemed to radiate from everywhere and nowhere at once, an omnipresent declaration that defied all attempts to trace its source. The galaxy's brightest minds scrambled to analyze the signal, but their efforts only deepened the mystery. The energy signature didn't match any known technology. It wasn't Kelran. It wasn't Otharai. It wasn't even Vorthin, whose ancient archives contained records older than some of the galaxy's stars. The conclusion was inescapable, though no one wanted to voice it aloud. Humanity. The name hadn't been spoken in centuries. For most, it had become little more than a fable, a cautionary tale about ambition and hubris. But for those old enough to remember, or for those species whose elders carried long memories, it was a name that chilled the soul. Humans had vanished into the ether, leaving behind ruins and whispers of their relentless will. And now, with 3 words, they had announced their return. Panic spread like wildfire. The Kelran Union held an emergency summit, their cold, cybernetic logic fraying under the weight of the unknown. The Othari scrambled to bolster their fleets, though they disguised their efforts as routine exercises. Even the normally composed Vorthin struggled to maintain their calm, their archivists frantically searching for anything that could explain the impossible. Theories abounded. Some argued it was a hoax, the work of a rogue AI or a particularly creative prankster. Others believed it was the remnants of humanity, a scattered few who had somehow survived in the dark corners of the galaxy. The most paranoid, however, feared the worst, that humanity had not only survived but thrived in the shadows, building something terrible and unknowable. The Cytheran Ascendancy, known for their stoicism, issued a single statement to their allies: prepare. But prepare for what? The galaxy's fleets mobilized, massive armadas taking to the stars in displays of power and precision. Yet, for all their might, they felt inadequate. The fear wasn't just of humanity's return, it was of the unknown. What had humanity become in their absence? How had they survived? And why had they chosen now to reemerge? Conspiracy theories began to circulate. Some claimed the humans had been hiding in the galactic core, evolving into something beyond comprehension. Others suggested they had mastered hyperspace itself, gaining the ability to manipulate the universe's very structure. A particularly creative theory suggested humanity had discovered how to communicate with black holes, harnessing their power to fuel their resurgence. Amidst the chaos, a dark realization began to settle in. No one had any idea what humanity's return meant. The transmission didn't demand anything. It didn't threaten or negotiate. It simply stated a fact. We are here. This simplicity was unnerving. It wasn't a plea for recognition or a boastful challenge. It was a declaration, cold and unyielding. The galaxy's greatest powers, with all their technology and wisdom, felt like insects standing before an approaching storm. They couldn't comprehend its size, its direction, or its purpose, only that it was coming. And then the silence returned. The signal disappeared as abruptly as it had arrived, leaving behind a vacuum of dread. Every race, every civilization, every being with the capacity to understand those three words was left to stew in their implications. Discussions turned into arguments, arguments turned into chaos. Trust, already tenuous, began to erode. The alliances that had held the galaxy together started to fracture under the weight of uncertainty. The galaxy's calm had been shattered, its illusions of safety stripped away. In the face of this new reality, one truth became painfully clear: the galaxy wasn't ready for whatever was coming. And somewhere in the shadows of the void, humanity waited. For some species, the return of humanity was not just an intellectual puzzle or a strategic concern, it was a waking nightmare. Their archives spoke of the human wars, conflicts so devastating they had reshaped entire sectors of the galaxy. Planets reduced to barren husks, fleets obliterated in blinding flashes of light, and alliances torn apart as the unrelenting force of humanity's will drove them to desperate measures. Humans had not been conquerors in the traditional sense, they had been survivors. When their homeworld became uninhabitable, they didn't perish, they adapted, scattering like embers in the wind. And like embers, they had burned, fiercely, unpredictably, and with a heat that left scars on the galaxy's collective memory. For many, the mere mention of humanity was enough to dredge up long-buried fears. The Vorathin, ever the keepers of knowledge, unearthed towards of the last great human conflict. These accounts were chilling. Humans had fought like cornered beasts, their ingenuity matched only by their determination. They weaponized the unthinkable, stars destabilized into supernovae, hyperspace corridors collapsed to trap pursuing fleets, and even entire ecosystems sacrificed to deny their enemies resources. To call it savagery was an understatement. Humanity had played a game of survival where no rule was too sacred to break. And yet, the galaxy had survived. Humanity's power had waned, their numbers dwindled, and eventually they vanished. Extinction, the galaxy assumed, had finally claimed them. It was a convenient truth, one that allowed the survivors to sleep easier. But now that fragile comfort was gone. The renewed signals carried more than just a message, they carried a warning. They were not random bursts of energy or meaningless fragments. Each transmission seemed to echo with intent, a slow drumbeat building toward something greater. The galaxy's most advanced species attempted to decode them, but they were met with only cryptic patterns and incomplete sequences. It was as though humanity was toying with them, revealing just enough to unsettle but not enough to understand. As the signals grew stronger, the cracks in galactic unity became impossible to ignore. The Kelran Union, once the staunch defenders of interstellar cooperation, pulled their fleets back to their core systems. For defensive purposes, they claimed, though no one believed them. The Othari, ever the opportunists, began amassing resources under the guise of a grand cultural celebration. Even the Jitharan Ascendancy, whose stoic silence had been a cornerstone of stability, started to mobilize their warships. Trust, already thin, dissolved like mist under a rising sun. Every species now viewed its neighbors with suspicion. What if the humans were working with one of them? What if someone knew more than they were letting on? Paranoia spread faster than the signals themselves, fracturing alliances that had taken centuries to build. The galaxy's less powerful species, caught in the crossfire of mounting tensions, could only watch as the great powers prepared for war. Diplomatic channels became battlegrounds of their own, with accusations and ultimatums flying in every direction. The fragile peace that had held the galaxy together for generations was unraveling, thread by thread. and still the signals continued. They began to take on a rhythm, a deliberate cadence that seemed to grow in complexity with each passing day. The transmissions weren't just noise, they were a presence, something that felt tangible despite being light years away. Entire civilizations began devoting resources to deciphering the messages, hoping to find answers before it was too late. But the more they studied, the more questions they unearthed. The energy signatures defied known science, as though humanity had unlocked secrets the rest of the galaxy couldn't begin to comprehend. The patterns seemed to shift and evolve, adapting to the attempts to decode them. It was as if the signals were alive, a ghostly whisper that refused to be silenced. Some species began to theorize that humanity had not merely survived but had become something greater. Perhaps they had ascended beyond the constraints of physical existence, becoming a force of nature rather than a simple race. Others speculated that they had forged alliances with unknown entities, dark and ancient powers that lurked in the unexplored corners of the galaxy. The most haunting theory, however, was also the simplest. Humanity hadn't changed at all. They had always been this way, relentless, unpredictable, and willing to do whatever it took to survive. Their disappearance had not been an extinction, but a choice. A retreat, perhaps, to gather strength and bide their time. Now, that time had come. The signals culminated in a final burst, one so powerful it disrupted hyperspace travel across multiple sectors. Fleets were stranded, communication networks fried, and entire planets plunged into isolation. The galaxy's great powers scrambled to restore order, but the damage was done. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy felt small. The vastness of space, once a source of comfort and possibility, now seemed suffocating. Humanity was no longer a memory, no longer a ghost story told to frighten younglings. They were here. And the galaxy wasn't ready. The void trembled. It began as a ripple, a distortion in the fabric of space that seemed more like a trick of the eye than an event of significance. But as the ripple grew, spreading outward like a stone dropped in a still pond, every sensor, every watchful eye turned toward it. What emerged wasn't just a ship, it was a nightmare made real. The battleship came into view like a predator stepping out of shadow, vast and incomprehensible. Its sheer scale defied everything the galaxy thought possible. This was no mere vessel, it was a cosmic leviathan, a monstrosity that dwarfed even the largest constructs of the Kelran Union, whose fleets were said to be among the most formidable in existence. Its surface was a patchwork of metals and materials that didn't match any known database. Some sections gleamed with a cold, polished brilliance, while others looked ancient, worn by time and the scars of battles long forgotten. Pulsing energy coursed through its hull, forming patterns that seemed alive, shifting and glowing with an eerie rhythm. The ship radiated a presence, a palpable weight that pressed down on the galaxy like a storm cloud about to burst. At first glance, the design seemed alien, almost incomprehensible. But upon closer inspection, there was something unmistakably human about it. The sharp angles, the purposeful symmetry, the sheer audacity of its size, these were hallmarks of humanity's defiant creativity. The battleship wasn't just a machine, it was a statement. A warning. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy held its collective breath. Entire fleets froze in place, their commanders paralyzed by the sight before them. The ship didn't move like a typical vessel. It didn't drift or navigate through hyperspace corridors. Instead, it tore through reality itself, as though hyperspace were a minor inconvenience to be shredded apart at will. This was technology that shouldn't exist. Not here, not now. The galaxy's greatest scientists had long concluded that no civilization could achieve such power without ascending to some form of energy-based existence. Yet here it was humanity had not only achieved it but had done so without losing their physical form. The battleship's appearance wasn't a slow reveal, it was an unveiling of dominance. It didn't shimmer into view like a mirage or fade from hyperspace in the traditional sense. It erupted into existence, forcing its way into reality with an authority that demanded attention. Panic gripped the galaxy's sentient races. On the Kelran homeworld, citizens watched in horror as live feeds displayed the battleship's emergence. The Othari, with their reputation for opportunism, abandoned their posturing and began retreating their fleets to fortified systems. Even the Shithran Ascendancy, stoic and unflinching in the face of most threats, showed visible signs of unease. The vessel remained motionless, suspended in the void like a monument to humanity's defiance. It didn't fire, didn't broadcast a message, didn't give any indication of its intentions. Yet its silence was louder than any declaration of war. Speculation ran wild. Was this humanity's flagship or merely a scout? Was it manned by flesh and blood humans, or was it controlled by an AI that had surpassed its creators? Theories ranged from plausible to absurd, but none offered comfort. The truth was too stark to ignore. Humanity had returned, and they had brought with them something the galaxy couldn't begin to match. As scans attempted to pierce the ship's hull, the results sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The material wasn't just advanced, it was impossible. It absorbed energy without emitting heat, deflected matter without a hint of strain, and seemed to exist in a state that defied the laws of physics. The Kelran's most advanced AI, tasked with analyzing the vessel, promptly overloaded and self-destructed after declaring the ship an irreconcilable anomaly. Across the galaxy, the realization set in this was not the return of a defeated race eking out a survival on the fringes. This was the return of a species that had evolved far beyond anything the galaxy had anticipated. Humanity hadn't been idle in their absence, they had ascended to the role of architects of the impossible. The battleship's sudden appearance sparked debates among the galaxy's leaders. Some argued that it was a scare tactic, a psychological maneuver to test their resolve. Others believed it was merely the first of many, a vanguard heralding a larger force. The most cynical feared it was a judgment day, humanity's reckoning for the galaxy's past sins. Amidst the chaos, a chilling thought began to take root. What if the battleship was waiting? Not for negotiations or alliances, but for something far simpler. An opportunity. Then, without warning, the battleship began to move. It wasn't a slow glide or a hesitant advance. It surged forward with a confidence that sent ripples through the void. Every eye in the galaxy was fixed on it, every sensor array locked onto its trajectory. The galaxy's fragile sense of safety had been shattered, and as the battleship disappeared once more into the shadows, it left behind a single, unshakable truth. The humans were back, and they were playing a game the galaxy didn't understand. The emergence of the human battleship sent shockwaves rippling through the galactic superpowers. What had once been a fragmented, forgotten race had returned as a storm, commanding the attention of every corner of the galaxy. No species could ignore the audacity of the ship's existence. It was an affront to everything they thought they knew, a declaration that humanity had not only survived but thrived in ways none of them could imagine. Panic swept through the high councils and senate chambers of every advanced civilization. The Kelran Union convened emergency summits, their delegates bickering over whether to deploy their formidable fleets or seek a truce. The Otharay Confederacy, true to their opportunistic nature, declared their intention to study the human arrival while quietly preparing to sell information to the highest bidder. Even the Zitharan Ascendancy, whose stoic demeanor rarely cracked, began bolstering their planetary defenses. The battleship wasn't just a ship, it was a gauntlet thrown at the feet of the galaxy. Every attempt to analyze the vessel's construction revealed only impossibilities. Its hull was impervious to the strongest sensor arrays, absorbing scans like a black hole devouring light. When a daring Kelran scout ship tried to shadow the battleship, it disappeared without a trace. It wasn't destroyed, it simply ceased to exist, as if the ship had decided it didn't belong. Theories abounded, each one more disturbing than the last. Had humanity uncovered some ancient cosmic secret? Had they allied with forces beyond comprehension? Or had they simply been biding their time, evolving into a civilization that no longer needed allies, resources, or even planets? The truth was far more unsettling. Hidden in the signals that accompanied the battleship's movements were fragments of information, hints of a greater story. Scholars pored over the data, piecing together a mosaic of humanity's journey. It became clear that the humans hadn't just survived, they had adapted with a ferocity unmatched in galactic history. When Earth became uninhabitable, humanity hadn't died out. Instead, they'd scattered, becoming nomads among the stars. But unlike other nomadic species, they hadn't lost themselves to the void. They had transformed it into their greatest ally. The battleship was the culmination of that transformation, a fortress born of desperation and ingenuity, a testament to their refusal to fade away. In their isolation, humanity had embraced risks other species wouldn't dare contemplate. They had tampered with hyperspace fields, weaponized quantum realities, and harnessed forces so volatile they were considered taboo by the galaxy's scientific elite. Where other civilizations saw boundaries, humanity saw challenges to overcome. And now they had returned not as scavengers or refugees, but as architects of a new future. The battleship's movements were as calculated as they were mysterious. It didn't launch attacks or issue ultimatums. Instead, it moved through the galaxy with purpose, its presence enough to unnerve entire systems. Each sector it entered was left in disarray, not from violence but from fear. The implications of its existence were more destabilizing than any weapon. Allies became enemies, treaties dissolved, and the once fragile peace unraveled. Even species that prided themselves on their diplomacy found themselves at odds, torn between cooperating against the human threat or attempting to curry favor with their enigmatic return. The galaxy fractured under the weight of its own paranoia. Amidst the chaos, a few civilizations dared to see the battleship not as a threat but as an opportunity. The Vorthin, ever-curious archivists of knowledge, sent probes to make contact, hoping to uncover the secrets of humanity's resurgence. Their probes returned with encrypted messages, not warnings, but riddles, puzzles that hinted at the vast expanse of human understanding. One of these riddles became infamous. What remains when the light of a dying star fades? Not emptiness, but a canvas for new constellations. It was both a challenge and a statement, one that sent scholars into a frenzy. Was this humanity's philosophy, a metaphor for their survival, or something more profound? While the galaxy scrambled for answers, the battleship made its next move. It appeared above a desolate, resource-stripped planet, a world thought to hold no value. But as it hovered there, a seismic shift in hyperspace energy rippled across the sector. The planet, once barren, erupted with activity. Energy grids, long dormant, roared to life. Structures began to rebuild themselves, as if awakened by the battleship's presence. It was no longer a mystery. Humanity hadn't returned to conquer, they had returned to create. The implications were staggering. The battleship wasn't just a weapon or a warning, it was a harbinger of transformation. Humanity's rise wasn't about reclaiming territory, it was about reshaping the galaxy itself. The barren planet, now a thriving hub of activity, was proof of their intentions. They weren't here to destroy, they were here to redefine the rules. And the galaxy, in all its complexity, was utterly unprepared. The galaxy teetered on the edge of chaos. The emergence of the human battleship had shattered the fragile balance of power, leaving no civilization unaffected. What had once been an uneasy peace, held together by tenuous alliances and shared distrust, now crumbled into a million fractured pieces. Across the stars, preparations for a galactic confrontation began to escalate. The galaxy's greatest powers, those who had once stood tall as titans of diplomacy and dominance, were now forced into a grim reckoning. The Kelran Union, once proud of its vast fleets and impregnable defenses, scrambled to organize its fractured council. The Scytheran Ascendancy, usually unshaken, began deploying every warship it could muster, their silvery hulls gleaming like the blades of a drawn sword. Even the opportunistic Othariae found themselves cornered, their mercenary fleets overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what humanity represented. But it wasn't just fear that drove these civilizations into action, it was desperation. Humanity's resurgence wasn't merely a threat to their existence, it was a challenge to everything they thought they understood about power, technology, and survival. For centuries, the galaxy's empires had grown complacent, confident in their superiority. Now, that confidence had been obliterated. The battleship, still shrouded in mystery, became the epicenter of galactic focus. It had no fleet to accompany it, no visible reinforcements. And yet, its solitary presence felt like a declaration of inevitable victory. It drifted through systems with an almost casual defiance, as though daring the galaxy to take a stand. The galaxy answered. Coalitions were forged, not out of loyalty but necessity. The most ancient rivalries were set aside as the galaxy's greatest powers united against the unknown. Hundreds of warships, from the sleek arrowheads of the Kelran Armada to the colossal, bristling dreadnoughts of the Shitharan Ascendancy, converged in a single, unprecedented show of force. It was a fleet unlike any seen before, a tapestry of cultures, technologies, and strategies. And yet, as they gathered, unease rippled through the assembled forces. No one knew if it would be enough. Humanity had re-emerged from the ashes of obscurity, wielding weapons and knowledge that defied explanation. How could they fight an enemy that operated outside the rules? The first encounter came swiftly and decisively. As the combined fleet approached the battleship's position, hyperspace distortions rippled across the sector. The battleship didn't flee, didn't even reposition itself. It simply waited, like a predator watching its prey approach. When the first volley of fire came, it was a coordinated strike. Hundreds of plasma cannons, particle beams, and missile swarms unleashed in a single, overwhelming wave. The void lit up with the ferocity of the attack, the combined might of a dozen species raining down upon the solitary ship. For a moment, it seemed as though the galaxy might stand a chance. Then came the counterstrike. The battleship responded not with overwhelming firepower, but with precision. Its weapons, if they could even be called that, operated on principles that defied understanding. Entire sections of the attacking fleet simply vanished, erased from existence with no explosions or debris. Ships that attempted to retreat found their systems overridden, their navigational controls spinning wildly out of control before they too disappeared into nothingness. The fleet fractured. Some ships broke ranks and fled, their commanders unwilling to face the unknown. Others pressed forward, driven by pride or desperation, only to meet the same fate. The battleship moved through the chaos with an almost serene inevitability, dismantling the galaxy's finest forces with clinical efficiency. But the battle wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The galaxy's leaders, watching the massacre unfold through live feeds and sensor arrays, were forced to confront a chilling truth: humanity wasn't just a military threat. They were a force of nature, a manifestation of survival itself. For every ship destroyed, every fleet scattered, the battleship seemed to grow stronger, not in size or firepower, but in the weight of its presence. It became a symbol, a harbinger of change that could not be ignored or resisted. Yet, even in the face of annihilation, pockets of resistance remained. The Vorthan's sentient archives transmitted one final message to the galaxy before their network was severed: they are not invincible. They are a mirror, reflecting our failure to adapt. Learn or perish. The message sparked a glimmer of hope. Across the galaxy, smaller factions began to think differently. Perhaps brute force wasn't the answer. Perhaps understanding humanity's rise, their resilience, their ingenuity was the key to surviving this new era. As the battleship disappeared into the darkness once more, leaving behind a trail of destruction and shattered alliances, the galaxy faced its greatest challenge yet. Not just the physical threat of humanity's return, but the existential question it posed. Could the galaxy evolve, or was it destined to fall before a species that had already mastered the art of reinvention? The stars, once a symbol of endless possibility, now felt like a chessboard where humanity had become the ultimate player. And as the galaxy braced itself for the next move, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for the very soul of the cosmos. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sci-Fi Horizon Stories for more thrilling tales of science fiction and adventure.